I've given you co-host, so you should be able to share.
Okay, I've never shared on Zoom, so I'm gonna figure this out right now. Let me see, it should be here. I apologize for my dog in the background. He's eating breakfast. Can you see the presentation? Yes, okay, awesome. Okay. So hi, my name is Adriana. I'm going to be presenting on Maeve Eberhardt and Kara Freeman's article, First Things First, I'm the Realist, Linguistic Appropriation, White Privilege, and the Hip Hop Persona of Iggy Azalea. Before we start discussing the article as a whole, I did want to point out some key terms that are going to be repeated throughout, just to ensure that everyone's aware of what they mean. So it is going to be about AAE, or sometimes referred to as AAVE, which is African American English, which is what we're going to be discussing. The Hip Hop Nation is also mentioned, and this is the imagined community. This is a direct quote from the article. The imagined community that spans the globe, whose members consume, create the music, and live the lifestyle associated with hip hop. So that is something to note, because we will be talking about that. Linguistic appropriation, which it seems very straightforward, but just in case, it's taking a manner of speaking, the slang, everything, etc., everything that goes with speaking, usually from a minority, African Americans, Hispanic, etc., and refashioning it to fit one's needs or to appear as one's own. And the fourth one is the copula absence. I am going to go into more detail about the copula absence in a bit, but just in case, it is sometimes referred to as the no copula or zero copula, and it is the absence of an auxiliary verb. For example, saying she not here instead of she is not here, or they at his house instead of they are at his house. So there's just some terms that I'm going to repeat a few times, just to have them, to not have to define them each time. In the article makes a very clear point of defining what is hip hop and the hip hop nation. And they speak very rather extensively about the origin of hip hop. And here's a very quick summary of it. It originated in urban centers of African American life on the East Coast of the US, arising from the severely depressed socioeconomic conditions and extreme marginalization of youth of color during the 1970s. So I mentioned that because, since this is about Iggy Azalea appropriating AAE and the hip hop, culture, it is important to note where hip hop came from. So for those of you who don't know who is Iggy Azalea, she is a white rapper, and she was born in Australia in 1990, but she moved to Miami when she was 16, also something important to note for the future. She is signed with and closely linked to her Ride or Die, T.I., who is an African-American rapper. And she started in 2012, most prominently. And in those first 2 years, between 2012 and 2014, she rose to fame very quickly and won multiple awards and broke multiple records just in those first 2 years, which the article tries to argue why that could be. There are some other white rappers mentioned, which are Vanilla Ice, which I will be honest, when reading, I had no idea who Vanilla Ice was, but he was actually he started out relatively successful. He tried to imitate Blackness and created this entire persona around him being from the ghetto or from a very poor neighborhood, but it was later found out that he was not from a poor neighborhood, and he was discovered to be fake. And his career quickly went downhill because of that, because it turns out that he grew up in the suburbs and had money and things like that. In contrast, another white rapper that was mentioned was Eminem, who did in fact grow up in a poor neighborhood, and he does address the privilege that his race has brought and directly attacks systematic racism and white privilege in his music, which is something that we'll look at later on. An example from one of his songs, the song White America, the lyric reads as follows. It says, "Look at my sales, let's do the math. If I was Black, I would have sold half." So he directly addresses his privilege within the genre. There are other examples in the article, other songs. I didn't want to go through all of them, but if you would like to look that up, you can definitely look at that. So what are the methods that the researchers used? They analyzed Iggy's 5 albums. At the moment, those were the only 5 albums that she had released. as well as 5 singles, which were not included in any album. And that totaled up to 48 songs. And the albums were The New Classic, Glory, Trap Gold, Ignorant Art, and Reclassified. They also analyze the lyrics and they get them from azlyrics.com, and they both authors check them to ensure that they were in fact accurate. So those are the methods that are used throughout the paper. So what African American English features does Iggy Azalea use in her music? She uses both commonly used AAE features, and when I say commonly used, I refer to features that aren't used only by native speakers, but rather they're used pretty, commonly. But paga la redundancia, pero they're used rather commonly. And she also uses less common ones, which are more distinctive of native AAE speakers. So some of the common ones that she uses are the R-lessness. For example, instead of saying Mr., she says Mr., or interdental fricative changes in through and though, instead of she says do, or mouth and she says mouth, or with and she says with. So those are some examples. She also uses multiple negation, like saying I don't want none, so the double negative, or third person singular with an S absence, like she go instead of she goes. And the copular ain't, if it ain't high class, which is the most common one, while the least common one, if we go to the other side, is the, where is the other ain't? The preterite ain't, where you could say, I ain't even graduate. Some of the other least common ones are the remote past been, and like saying, got money, been had it, or the completed done, like tip done, made an investment. And then she also employs the habitual be and the non-habitual be, which are pretty specific to native AAE speakers. So that the habitual be would be like my chat room be poppin', and the non-habitual be these rumors be fable, which has the equative copula. It is important to note that she doesn't use the N-word in any of her lyrics. So it seems to be a boundary that she doesn't cross. So that's something to be aware of, that even though she does use native speaker levels of AAE, she doesn't do that. So that's something to note. She also uses slang from the African American lexicon, like the words bougie, meaning high social status. These are all examples from her songs, like broke hoes think I'm bougie, or the word fina to indicate the immediate future, like now I'm fina kill this shit. The word girl, which similar to the word brother in AE, refers to a sort of solidarity between African American women, in this case, because of the use of girl, like never measure up to a bitch like me, girl. And grown up, I don't know if everyone else hears an echo or if it's just me. I'm not sure, okay. She also uses the word grown, like we too grown for this messy shit, or the word thick to refer to a voluptuous female, which is something she does quite often, like damn, she too thick. She does refer to that a lot, and we will be touching on her reference to the word thick later on. I mentioned the copula absence, or the no copula, zero copula. And in the article, the researchers compare the use of copula absence in different artists' music in their lyrics, including Iggy Azalea, 3 African-American artists, and Eminem. And they compare their use of the copula absence in their music. So Iggy Azalea's use of copula absence, which would be things like she not here, they at his house, things like that, is almost at the same with the 3 African-American artists who have AAE as their native language, or as their native speak. So she is actually second highest in every category to the artist. She actually, beats out some of them. And so that's something interesting to note. But Eminem, another white rapper, has very few instances of copula absence in his music, and even less instances of copula absence in his interviews. So the first one that I showed you here is their lyrics and the music, but the second table is the second graph is their occur instances of copula absence in their interviews. So in their, what would you say was normal speak. So in this one, the African-American artists still have quite a bit, Juvenile particularly has quite a bit of instances of copula absence, but Eminem has none. He has no instance of copula absence. And this is a phenomenon very often seen in AAE. And Iggy Azalea has one instance of copula absence. And this instance of copula absence was made in an interview where she was imitating another artist who happened to be African-American. So it isn't exactly, you know, her speaking that way. I did mention that she is Australian. So during her normal speak, she does speak in her Australian accent. So that is important to note. So there are a few conclusions. There's a relatively jam-packed slide, but there are a few conclusions. So Iggy Azalea's appropriation of AAE seems to be part of an entire persona she has created. She created this entire persona of an African-American person while still being white. And it's so accurate that she's able to sing as a native speaker of AAE would with the same markers. And her lack of AAE in her normal speech, as I mentioned in the interviews, further proves the creation of this persona. She never directly addresses her white privilege. She does hint at it occasionally. She does mention that she is white, but usually it's something like saying that she is white and people like underestimate her because she's white in the rap industry. So it's never, I apologize. It is never addressing her white privilege in the industry, which is very clear considering that it is a mainly Black-led industry. And she's called out people who ask her to address the white privilege or have, you know, called her out for her white privilege. She calls them haters. And these are not just members of the community or the audience, they are also prominent artists like Azalea Banks and rapper Q-Tip. So they have both called her out on her white privilege in the industry. So her main source of marketing is her physical appearance. That's why I wanted to mention, I mentioned the word that she uses a lot, which is thick. She's created a whole marketing strategy around her physical appearance and the persona that she's created, which includes AAE speak. And I have a quote from the article where it says, African-American female rappers use these strategies as a way of inverting dominant cultural ideals and affirming Black female bodies as sexually appealing. Iggy relies on these same strategies in promoting a body which, as the archetype of beauty and allure, needs no promotion within cultural imagination. So the way that she is using her body to promote herself is in the same way that African-American female rappers did and do so, as a way to show that not only white bodies are attractive or not only white bodies are beautiful, which is, in a way, she is exploiting the original use for her own gain, which is also part of the definition of linguistic appropriation, which is what she's doing. I have another quote, Iggy profits from the cultural performativity and forms of survival that Black women have perfected without having to encounter and deal with the social problems that is the Black female body with its perceived excesses, unruliness, loudness, and lewdness. So she benefits from everything that one could benefit from being Black, while not having to deal with the issues that would entail as well. So she's able to show her body, which is very similar to a stereotypically Black female body, but is able to show it without and profit from it without the negative aspects that would come if she were Black. And then the final example in the paper of a lyric from her music, which sort of, I would say hits the final nail in her coffin of, appropriation. There's a lyric in her song called Drugs, where she raps, "When it really starts, I'm faster than a runaway slave master." So that a very clearly insensitive lyric. And this was rapped while making a whip-like hand motion. And in the video, if you look up the video where she raps it, this is what happens, which is the song Drugs, in case you want to look that up. And it shows a very clear disregard for African-American history and, the horrors that happened with the slaves in the past. So it shows that her use of AAE is purely to benefit from, to market herself and be able to like be relevant and succeed in the hip hop and rap community. So when asked about this, her ride or die, T.I., who is African-American, he argued that because she is Australian, she is not as sensitive to race as those who have grown up in the US. So I don't know if you remember what I mentioned before, that she moved to the US when she was 16. She is currently 30 something, I think she's 32. So it has been quite a few years since she's been in the US. So it's a very, I don't think it's a valid argument that T.I. makes, since she moved to the US when she was 16, but it is something that he says. Before I go on to the last quote that I have here, I did mention to the professor too that if she wanted to send a song, she does. I'm sure you've heard songs by Iggy Azalea. You might not know it, but she
I
does
didn't send drugs or pussy or the other one.
Okay, all right. Well, she does have. They do in the article. They do present 3 examples of videos, from music videos, which are the song "Work," the song. There's 3 songs: the song "Work," the song "Pussy," and one more. And in all of them, Iggy Azalea is basically the only white person in the video, and she's surrounded by African-American women. In one of them, she is a stripper, and she is surrounded by African-American women twerking. And in another one, she's like a dancer, a different type of dancer, and she's also again surrounded by African-American women. So it does seem to sort of negate the whole, what is the word I'm looking for? It does seem to show her sense of superiority over the African-American woman that she is in the video with, but that's, I guess, up to interpretation. And finally, I did want to mention a tweet that the authors mentioned at the end by @Loco Ernesto, who tweeted, "Everyone wants to be Black until it's time to be Black." And this was made as a way to call out various white musicians who perform within rap, the rap and hip hop genre, and that constantly appropriate Black speak and Black culture. But when it came to the murder of 18-year-old Michael Brown, who was an African-American teenager who was shot to death by a white police officer, they had nothing to say. They had nothing to say about the protest, nothing to say about the shooting, just no comment. So it was a way of calling them out. Everyone wants to be Black until it's time to be Black. I think that's it. Are there any questions? I'll stop sharing. Let me.
Thank you so much, Adriana, for that really good summary of some of the key points of this article. If anyone has looked through it, it's one of the funner, lighter pieces of sociolinguistics, I suppose, because so far some of the literature that we've been dealing with has been really much on the philosophical end of things, the pondering on meaning, and this is to do with meaning. I suppose this could lend itself to an analysis of intertextuality. No, she's using other people's voices and to construct her own persona as a hip hop artist, right? And we know that the genre of hip hop originates from the African American community, right? So it's actually quite common in global hip hop artists from around the world to appropriate features of African American English. So we could get people, from France or from Sweden using features of AAE, but I suppose what's fascinating here is that it's happening within the English language, right? And the content of her lyrics and how she looks, as Adriana mentioned. So does anyone want to comment on or reflect on Adriana's presentation?
I think at first I was giving Iggy a little bit of the benefit of the doubt, but as the presentation progressed, I was, you know what, this is so wrong. She's so wrong. As you said, cancel Iggy. And I think when I also read the paper, and it also has, that same progression. At the beginning, you're like, como interesting. And I haven't heard about that. And at the end, you're like almost completely going against Iggy and everything that she stands for. And I think that's an entertaining read as well for that aspect in itself. And also, there's a lot of IPA there, which meant that I would have to go back and sound things. I was sounding thing while I was using the presentation, because they had all the IPA symbols, and Diana presented all the IPA symbols in the specific speech. So I thought that was great as well.
Yeah, definitely, Marcos. I think this is kind of like my favorite type of linguistics. My favorite type of linguistics is the one that incorporates everything. Because here we see at the Eberhard and Freeman, they're talking about syntactic constructions, right? They talk about the negation aspect of it, the copula deletion, right? And they provide examples. And then as well, they also talk about the phonological features. And I suppose this kind of hints at, how African-American English has been enregistered, like all these different features have been enregistered as, characteristic of building or constructing a hip hop persona. So this is like third order indexicality, probably. So first order is when it first becomes noticeable, like, African Americans speak differently from other people or from standard English. And then you kind of like build on those different meaning linkages. And then you're like towards the end, and usually the end linkages of indexicality are other people appropriating something that they saw to construct another meaning. So all of these terms are very interrelated. Indexicality has to do with meaning. Intertextuality has to do with reproducing what somebody else said, also has to do with meaning, right? So it's very interesting. It's fascinating how Freeman and Eberhard talk about el repertorio, the repertoire features that Iggy Azalea uses to assert herself as a member of this hip hop community. But I suppose the problem, el problema radica, the problem lies not necessarily in the fact that she's using these terms, as Adriana said, like look at all these other rappers that have done it in the past, Eminem, Vanilla Ice, right? But the problem is the extent to which she does it, so that when you hear her rap, you probably wouldn't think this sounds like this is somebody who's white, right? And she's also appropriating phonology, which is even like a finer level. Not everybody can do that. And also, the content is also problematic. Like the example of a slave master, I found especially like the worst out of everything. And then I suppose as well, calling herself thick, or like talking about her own body as that of of an African American woman. There's a lot of different implications and ramifications of how she's constructing her persona, and whether that's disregarding the experience of discrimination of African American people and in the history of the United States. Janita and then Brenda.
Yeah, I wanted to comment on the same example. I don't listen to her music, so the examples I'm basing on what was presented. I think it's problematic, and as I was mentioning in the comments, I'm not very familiar with other contexts, but through internet, it's possible to, you know, have an idea of what's happening in the world, right? Especially if it is in the US. So recently there's been a lot of talking about the difference between borrowing and appropriation. And I think it's important to keep in mind that it's usually the white people who are borrowing for something that they want to do. And when they borrow words or styles, like it's happening a lot with women and the different, I don't know the right words, but the different African styles for hair that do have a meaning, they do have a purpose. And I'm like, my issue is not with doing the hairstyle. Like, okay, I understand that they're interesting and whatnot. However, it's important to keep in mind that when Black women do them, like the Afro and men as well, they're heavily criticized for that. And it's their natural hair. Like, they're not even doing anything to make it look like that. You know, they're just doing a hairstyle that for them has a particular meaning. But when white or wealthy people do the same thing, it's like, oh my God, that's so amazing. Wow, creative. And no, it's not. So, I mean, it's not like they came up with it. You know, they're just taking it from somebody else and getting the credit for it. So I see the same situation with the lyrics that were presented. And it's, to me, when you mentioned, when, you know, when Adriana mentioned Eminem, for example, I think it's interesting. Maybe I misunderstood, but Eminem is considered like one of the best rappers, and he's not Black. But even Black rappers respect him a lot because of what he did, especially like a few years ago, right? And he was able to, like, I don't know how to say it, resaltar or sobresalir in rapping, even though he's white. So he has like his own thing, and maybe I misunderstood from the presentation. But what I understood is that he's not using that so much, and we have Iggy using, like, appropriating from the Black community. And I think like it's important, like, not just because you're like a hip hop artist or a rapper, you have to speak this way. I think there's a difference between being interested and fascinated by, you know, this culture or like this race, this way of speaking that you appreciate, you respect, but then when you try to act as if it's yours, it becomes problematic because it's not. And I think like there are people who use it showing respect to this community, and it shows, you know, it shows in their lyrics, it shows in the way they're dressing, it shows in how they speak about this community. And to me, that's okay, maybe because I'm not a part of the community, right? So this is my opinion. But I don't think that this is the case, especially because she's not even from the US. And as I mentioned in the comments, this issue is also in Australia. So it's not like an excuse to not understand what's happening. And I think there's just one other thing that I wanted to mention before I finish. And so, okay. I'm sorry, I'm tired. Yeah, I just think like it, in this case, it really shows appropriation, and it's very like visible in the example about the slave master. Like, it's contradictory that you're so fascinated and you want to show respect and use this language because you think it's wonderful, but then you mention the slave master, which you already would be the slave master in history, you wouldn't be the slave. So it's like, you know, it shows that she's not like really feeling as this language is her own, because if it were like that, I doubt she would say something like that. So yeah, I think that's my comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Yarita. You mentioned a lot of different aspects of this paper that we could certainly unpack and like talk for a long time. But I think that one of the interesting things that you mentioned was talking about Eminem and how he's respected versus Iggy, and why could this be it so? As Adriana mentioned, he pays the respects to the community, but as well, there are different layers of privilege, right? So we know anyone, well, no, we know, but anyone who's aware of the Eminem story knows that he comes from an impoverished background, like working class family. So a lot of the times, these people that are from a particular lower socioeconomic background, they tend to cohabit or they live in multi-ethnic neighborhoods. No, so in this case, probably in Eminem's socialization or coming to be, he probably had a lot of Black friends, right? And didn't he also start with Dr. Dre as well? So, you know, I suppose that in this case, even though he still has white privilege and he acknowledges it, he also, you know, wasn't perhaps like originally as privileged. You know, now he's super famous, but I suppose that aspect in and of itself perhaps makes it more permissible, alongside the way that, you know, he pays respect to the African American community. Maybe he, in that sense, it becomes more okay for people of the African American community to hear someone like Eminem, right? Whereas Iggy Azalea from Australia, what do we really know about her background, upbringing? Apparently, Adriana says that something about racial issues in Australia, of it not being an issue over there, people appropriating. Is that in the article?
The mention of, because the whole thing about T.I. saying that she doesn't know racial issues because she's from Australia.
It's T.I. Okay, yeah. So she says that.
I was
She
gonna
says that.
comment, like,
Because Australia is actually very racist.
yeah,
It's
but also
okay, Natalie.
terrible things to the Aborigines.
Yeah, they're super racist. They're, if you go to you Google, you'll see videos that are viral of racial aggressions in public spaces against immigrants and like people of color over there. But it's quite fascinating because I think that during moments of colonization, I think they also sent los criminales allá. I don't remember much about the history of Australia, but I do remember of the history of English in Australia. So like,
I think the English sent their prisoners to Australia because they
Yeah.
were running the room.
yeah. So yeah, there's probably a lot of different layers of privilege there and discrimination over there as well. But you know, certainly she is divorced from US context and US systemic racism. She's probably the product or the outcome of other kinds of racisms in Australia, but doesn't necessarily excuse something that the whole world, especially someone like her, should know, right? Brenda.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment because there's, for me, it's an interesting thing with music that you don't have to be fluent in a language to sing. So maybe I was thinking about how maybe she's imitating sound, or she's imitating something that has to do with hip hop, and
To
I don't know.
sell.
Yeah, I don't know anything about Izzy. Iggy is her name, right? So, yeah, I haven't heard her music, but I was thinking about that because there has been in the past issues with people that wanted to appropriate identity, Black identity specifically. There's a famous case about Rachel Dolezal, that she was a professor in a university, and eventually she had to remove herself from that because she was definitely white. She came from a white background. So there was a backlash for herself. So eventually she had to backtrack and negate what she was trying to build, because like Adriana said in her presentation, it's not the same to say that you're Black than to live as a Black person. So I think that's a very important issue when you're trying to appropriate the
Definitely.
Black identity. also, I think that Eminem, the thing with him is that he's very true to himself. He's not trying to be anyone else but himself. So he's authentic. So that's a thing that you can recognize, that you can maybe celebrate, because he's not, I don't think that he's trying to appropriate a Black identity. He's just being himself, and he's gonna be true to that. So I think that's why he has the respect of others.
Yeah, definitely, Brenda. And probably as well, he probably has that respect because he's lived near people of color that have been discriminated against. So he knows where not to, en donde no pararse, o sea, what not to do, right? I wanted to say something about what you just said about Iggy. Y se me fue. Oh, yes. Yes. Exactly. So Iggy doesn't know. So a lot of people that appropriate don't know what it means to be part of that marginalized group that they're appropriating. It's all fun and games when you're doing it for your own personal gain. You can, maybe it's fun every now and then. I'm gonna walk in their shoes and I'm gonna speak that way so that I can, so that I can get the positives of that community. But I won't get the negatives because no one will ever judge me when I'm in a job interview because I speak African-American English. No one's ever gonna judge me on the basis of my color. I'm not gonna get stopped by a police officer, right? So it's like you're cherry picking whatever is desirable and worse, exploiting it for your whole identity and personal gain. Right. So in the film Talking Black in America that Lause has watched, and anyone else who has taken class with me, I think Natalia as well, has watched, they talk about this. They talk about the history of African-American English in the US and how it came to be. I provided a link to it on the chat with a password. It's passworded TBIADVD. I can share the link as well in WhatsApp, which I think would be better. It's a linguistics film, and it has a lot of different linguistic commentators, famous sociolinguists and dialectologists, and people that study Black education, all commenting on the history of African-American community, their practices, and music is one of them. They're saying, like, isn't it interesting how, for the most part, there are so many different aspects of their culture that get shunned and punished, and people don't want to see them. It can't be made public. It's seen as uneducated, less desirable. It's seen as dangerous, right? Everything except for entertainment. For entertainment, it's okay to talk like an African-American, no? So considering the whole history of how they're discriminated, but no, I'm gonna use the entertainment bit, right? I think that's probably at the crux of the whole issue. And then I was thinking as well, Brenda, as you mentioned, appropriation of sound and how people do it in music a lot. I was thinking about the Beatles. So the Beatles, when they crossed over to the United States, they started doing it. And I know this because I took a class of history of American rock and roll. Fun fact, I took that in La Universidad de Arizona. So I learned that the Beatles, when they first started crossing over, they sang with an American accent some of their songs, so that they could become popular here. So it's almost like Iggy did it strategically, right? She didn't want to just stay in Australia. She wanted to be famous in the hip hop movement in the US, which is like, home of the hip hop movement. She wanted to go global. So yeah, that was my other second thought. Adriana.
I just wanted to mention something quick. You already sort of mentioned it, which is that she does sort of cherry pick the things that she wants from African-American culture and uses it to her advantage. And in the presentation, I had mentioned that she rose to fame really, really fast. Like she got famous really, really fast. And it's not something that would have happened probably if she were Black. And the fact that she is white is related to that. And someone in the chat had mentioned something about, I think it was you, Professor, who mentioned if she had addressed it or if she had said a statement about it.
Yeah, like recently. Sorry.
Well, she's actually, she's had a lot of problems, not just because of this, but also because she does seem to be very, what is the word? Like, she seems to be Black facing. That she does tan very, very dark. And she's been called out for it a lot of times. And she always just says that it's the light from the camera, or that everyone who's saying these are just haters who can't think that a white girl can't rap. And she has publicly stated these things. And I think she has addressed the whole thing about her being Black. And again, her ride or die, T.I. has defended her a lot throughout this. They even asked him if he was the one who wrote her songs. And he said that he was no ghostwriter and that she wrote her own rhymes. And he defends her like with everything. She blackfaced and he defended her. And it's like this whole thing. So it seems interesting that she has this guy like in her corner to defend everything she does, but she has stated it. I can send a link of the article through the chat.
That's interesting. Yeah, so she's faced backlash. I was thinking about, as you were talking about Iggy, and like how, this is an interesting example, right? We're taking someone who's global and we're analyzing the language that has gotten them there. So I was also thinking, as you were presenting, wouldn't it be cool if somebody did a socio-linguistic analysis of Bad Bunny? Wouldn't it be cool? Because he's like #1 in Spotify artists. He's #1 in the world right now. And he's from the hip hop movement. He's from Puerto Rico. We're colonized. So like, we are all aware of, the messages that he brings about the LGBTQ community, no? But this kind of analysis on the finer level, like, what is he doing something phonetically? Like, I know that he uses different synthesizers, like voice boxes or whatever, but I would be interested in seeing what linguistic aspects is he using for his own persona construction. I was thinking about that. And then I was also thinking about P-Day, who, by the way, I know that he has an album out that he code switches a lot. And when he code switches, cuando habla en inglés, he speaks accented English. And he does that strategically to talk about temas de colonialism in Puerto Rico. Fascinating. His latest album, he has a song called Mambrú, como de Mambrú se fue a la guerra. That's art. It's a great song. But yeah, those were like additional ideas that were popping in my head. Anyway, so Adriana just shared with us the latest article of Blackfishing Iggy Azalea. So I think that this has been a very fruitful conversation. And I think it has been an excellent presentation and introduction, Adriana, by the way, to this week's topic, which is language and race. But specifically from a ratio-linguistic perspective. But this article brings like a different spin on that, like how we can use meaning attached to language and for our own persona construction. So really fascinating presentation. Thank you so much, Adriana. And thank you so much, everybody, for logging in, today to talk about this. Any additional comments, song listening suggestions of hip hop, Vanilla Ice? Should we all listen to Vanilla Ice, Brenda? No, we shouldn't.
No, his music wasn't that good. So
Okay, but we could still listen. This could be our Saturday soundtrack, you guys. Like your homework is to listen to Iggy if you haven't, and then all the other people in this article. Okay, and I've sent you a link of Talking Black in America if you want to watch that in your own time, documentary about African American English with a password. Get on password. Anyway, so have a good Saturday, you guys, and see you Tuesday. Thank you, Adriana. Thank you, everyone.
Have a good day. Buen fin de semana.
Have a good day, everyone.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Every day.